Welcome to today's panel event. My name's Martha McKeen, and I lead the Cyber Community and Education team here at CommBank. Every year, the cost of cybercrime is continuing to increase, and that's why it's incredibly important to highlight the things we can all do to help protect ourselves online. Before we kick things off and I introduce our incredible panelists today, I'd like to first acknowledge the traditional owners upon the land that we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the traditional owners where our panelists are located today, and of course our viewers as well, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So let's kick things off and introduce our panelists, some of whom, in the spirit of 2020, have joined us virtually. So I'll start with Keith Howard. Keith,
hello,
good
Martha.
to see you. Hello. So Keith is Commonwealth Bank's Group Chief Information Security Officer. Keith was appointed into the CISO role in 2019, where he leads the cyber division for the group, including CommBank and Bank West, and is responsible for keeping the group and its customer information safe and secure. And before joining CommBank in 2015, Keith delivered technology transformation programs and managed global teams across multiple industries, including petroleum, transport, and software, having lived in both the UK and Australia. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
Joining us via video conference, we've got Denis Moriarty, who's the Group Managing Director for Our Community. Our Community works with not-for-profits, providing advice and training for people and organizations that are working to build stronger communities and create social change in Australia and abroad. Denis sees Our Community as an organization to assist, inspire, and encourage debate and improve the social fabric of Australia. Denis was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia in 2020 for his significant service to the community, to social welfare, and to public administration. Welcome, Denis. And last but absolutely not least, we have Professor Lesley Seebeck. She was Chief Investment and Advisory Officer at the Digital Transformation Agency, arriving there from the Bureau of Meteorology, where she served as Chief Information Officer. She was recognized as the federal government CIO of the Year in 2017, and in 2019, she was appointed to the Naval Shipbuilding Advisory Board. Professor Seebeck has extensive experience in strategy, policy, management, information technology, and research in the Australian public service, industry, and academia. Welcome, Lesley.
Thank you very much, Martha.
So let's kick things off. Let's get started. The first question I'd like to ask is a bit of a reflection on 2020. It's been quite a year so far in many respects, but what I'd like to zone in on is, from a cybersecurity perspective, what have we learned? What's happened? So Keith, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right.
Sure, thanks Martha, thanks for the intros. I just want to take a moment to thank Lesley and Denis for joining us today as well as our esteemed guests. Really looking forward to this. Yeah, what a year so far. I suppose I'll concentrate on the very active threat landscape that we're seeing, but also the continuing kind of opportunity surface is growing for attackers as well, which I'll come back to. If we look at the threat landscape, I'd concentrate on three things. One is ransomware, the second is cyber extortion, and the third is business email compromise. Ransomware is where malicious software is downloaded and encrypts all of your data. A ransom is then, requested, demanded for that data to be unencrypted so that you can use it again. We've seen a tremendous increase in ransomware and the aggression used by attackers as well, and that's affecting all companies, large and small. There's some examples I'm sure we're all aware of over the last 9 months with TravelX, Toll Group, Lion as well. But it's important to note, I think, that we've also seen that with some of our customers across a number of sectors, agribusiness, for example, accounting, and so on. So really nobody is immune from ransomware. In particular, as cyber hygiene increases, criminals will basically go after the weakest link in the supply chain. The second one, which is related to cyber extortion, where basically attackers say they've got some of your confidential data, either personal or business, and they will be releasing that unless you give them some money. And the third one is business email compromise. And this one really is, criminals can look on social media. They can work out fairly easily the interconnections between yourself and different people that work in the same company, spoof the email address, send you an email that purports to come from your friend or colleague, and it's got a link on it or it's got an attachment, and hey presto, you've been compromised. So the opportunities, I think that kind of surface landscape is getting larger in the COVID world. A lot more people working from home, of course, which is, lacks the control that we get in the kind of office environment. And as you know, I'm a CISO, so control is one of my things. I think that's important to note. Plus, we've seen a massive jump for small to medium enterprises now moving online as well over the last few months. So as I said, rich in opportunity, unfortunately, but also it's a pretty lively threat landscape we're seeing. Yeah,
interesting summary. It seems like, some threats that we've seen before, but escalating, but then, the new environment that we're in, just again, sort of providing that additional opportunity for cyber criminals.
Absolutely.
And just sort of continuing on that theme, from a small business perspective, Keith, do you have any anecdotes about what our customers are sort of experiencing?
Yeah, I think an example there would be on the business email compromise. We're seeing, particularly through Bank West, some of our customers, particularly in the real estate segment, quite often get hit by that because obviously you've got landlords and vendors, etc. Sending emails saying where funds should be directed, so on and so forth. So we understand that is an example of certainly where business email compromise is happening quite regularly.
And such a huge impact for a small to medium enterprise to be hit by business email compromise and lose anywhere from a couple of thousands of dollars to $500,000.
Yeah, and it's also it's the financial aspect, but it's also the emotional aspect of being compromised as well that we've got to bear in mind. I think that's an important aspect.
Absolutely, it's absolutely traumatizing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Lesley, I'll direct the next sort of part of that question to you, which is the Australian government issued a warning to organizations across all sectors about heightened state-sponsored activity. Lesley, what did you make of this announcement and its implications for Australian businesses?
Thank you, Martha. And to echo Keith's point, I mean, what we're seeing is an increase in or ratcheting up of activity in the cyberspace, particularly with the pandemic. And disruptions tend to cause problems, vulnerabilities, opportunities for a whole range of actors as well. Particularly in that nation-state space, we're seeing nation-states, and there are about 4 that are of particular concern, acting to exploit vulnerabilities and actively attacking organisations, government agencies, again, organisations, whether they're in business or the community and not-for-profit sector, pursuing economic, political, strategic outcomes. We're also seeing, again, because it's purely opportunistic, we're seeing a whole range of criminal actors also taking advantage of the disruption. And a couple of things here. Firstly, the tools and methods are crossover between the two areas. So we can't sort of just distinguish between a phishing attack from a nation-state actor versus that of a criminal organisation. And so it's very hard to define. You need to actually sort of say, right, we need to actually harden ourselves across the board regardless. We're also seeing a range of new attacks coming into play. It's because as soon as some of these attacks are out in the wild, they'll be picked up and used. And so it's a constantly evolving landscape as well. I'm expecting these attacks or this threat environment to continue to increase simply because with things like working from home, with the greater vulnerability of business as we're taking on board new technologies, anything that's got to do with sort of supply chains, value chains and business, lateral movement between organisations offers opportunities that will be exploited. And that's been the tenor of some of the advice coming out from the Australian government as well.
Thanks, Lesley. And just to sort of close this section off, Denis, we've talked a lot about sort of tradecraft of individuals and nation-state warfare, but let's sort of bring this back to sort of more a privacy legislation lens. We've spoken a lot about what new privacy legislation, whether it be domestic or international, has meant for the not-for-profit space. So I was wondering if you could sort of reflect on what it's meant for your sector.
It's been a big impact for our sector. Privacy has always been an issue that's been on the agenda, and cybersecurity, for a whole variety of reasons that we'll probably go into soon, has not been on the agenda. And all of a sudden, just like COVID, it's here. It's not going to go away, and not-for-profits have to realise, as business does, that they must start doing things to address that. Where we've addressed privacy issues, which has traditionally been about someone's name or someone's identity, and we've had identity theft trying to occur, cybersecurity just goes that so much further for not-for-profits. There's data that's held in not-for-profits that aged care facilities have health records of people. They have not just their age or their name and address. It goes far deeper, and these are the issues that are now at stake for not-for-profits, and they fundamentally have to readdress what they're doing about it. It is on the agenda, it has to be on the agenda, and it's bigger than just privacy.
And Denis, do you have any sort of reflections from the not-for-profit space around organizations being impacted?
I think there's many cases, and I think, most not-for-profits don't want to publicise because it's extremely embarrassing. But I think we have to realise that organisations have to map all the data that they've got and who are their clients. And I think this is putting people's lives at risk. If you take a family violence service where children have been ripped out of homes to protect their lives, and their data is kept where their new foster place is or where they're staying at an emergency shelter, and that data is sort of put out into the ether, it's those children's lives, it's that mum's life. And I think those things where you consider, well, who would have thought something like that could actually put someone's life at risk? And I think there's everyday solutions that not-for-profits and small businesses, whether it's a news agency or a hairdresser, you've got data that sort of is very important to people for a whole variety of right and wrong reasons. It doesn't matter. If you compromise that, you are putting people at risk. And that has to be the number one consideration for people to address.
Absolutely. Really good summary there, that it's not just about an organization's availability or online services, it's also about that organization's reputation that is at risk with some of these incidents. So just moving on, I'd like to talk about what are some of the misconceptions that are often held by business leaders when it comes to cybersecurity. What are those sort of stereotypes that exist that maybe aren't so helpful? And I might start with you, Keith, because you've been in the role as CISO for about 12 months now, coming from another part of Combank. I was wondering if you could maybe share what some of your misconceptions might have been before you moved into security.
Oh, sure. Happy to. And also I commonly see this one is that it's just all too complex. It's all about technology is the biggest misconception, I think, personally. If you think about it, technology is the playing field, without a shadow of a doubt, but actually all of the players are people. So cyber very much, whether the attackers or whether the defenders, if you like, is a human business. And I think that's really important to note. And the human beings on your team are going to be offering the biggest threat in some respects if they're not educated in security, but also your biggest defense as well. The second one, which Lesley briefly mentioned earlier on, is the barrier to entry for a cyber criminal is getting lower and lower. I think there's a common misconception that you have to be some kind of technological genius to be able to work out how to compromise. But actually, we're seeing vulnerabilities being weaponized and shared very swiftly in the market right now, in general. So I think those are the two key ones. Maybe one last one is it's because it's complex, it's hard and therefore expensive to do anything about it, is another misconception. I think we're going to get to this later on. There are some really simple steps we can take to actually make our people, our data, our customers more secure.
That's right. And we all play a part in that, driving that cyber accountability, right? So
absolutely.
It's important that people dispel that one in particular. I agree.
Cyber is everyone's business.
Exactly
absolutely.
Right. That's right. And Lesley, just following on from that, from Keith's response, can you speak to some of the misconceptions you've encountered in either the university space or within government itself?
Yes, thank you. And again, very similar to Keith, in as much as I've been told that it's just a technology problem, so go away and fix it. 90% of cyber issues are around the people. Do you have the right culture in place? Are your users aware of what some of the issues are? Are you funding, again, this is a people decision, are you funding, prioritizing security of your systems and your data? What is your relationships up and down your supply and value chains, etc. So those are the sort of things that really need to come to the fore when you think about cyber. And don't get me wrong, there's about 10% of technology which is really important, because that can sort of bring you down very, very easily. So it's very important, but most of it's about people. It's about people too, because your organization there is to support and serve people as well. The second one is that, particularly you see this in some of the smaller businesses, is that we're just too small. Well, no, the value of your data and your systems, you might be a critical component in a supply chain. You might have data that is actually really interesting to attackers, either because data tends to attract other data, so they can take the data that might be held in your organization and fit it with other data and get a bigger picture, particularly if the attacker is a nation state. Or they might be able to say, we can sell this on the dark web because other people might find that of value, and so on that goes. Secondly, I've also heard, particularly from some government agencies, that, look, the stuff we've got is actually openly available. Why would anyone bother? Well, the thing about cyber, it's not just about the value of your data, it's also about the accessibility of your systems and the services you provide. It's about the integrity of what you do and the trust that's involved in people relying on you. And so that can be also deeply affected as well. And the third one, and the final one, just to again reflect Keith's point too, is the idea that it is too costly. It's too complex and it's too costly. And given that most of it's around, people, are you looking after your systems? Are you engaging in sort of basic technology and governance hygiene? I would dispute that. And secondly, people tend to think about one-off costs. Well, firstly, it's an ongoing sort of a battle almost. You have to keep engaged in this. But in that regard too, we can start thinking about other things that are appropriate to businesses, how we think about businesses run, and hook into those and try and address it that way.
Thanks, Lesley. And I just wanted to quickly reference a really interesting study that the Australian Cybersecurity Centre has recently put out, where they surveyed small businesses about cybersecurity. And really what they found was sort of really supporting what we're discussing here in terms of some of the blockers that exist. So 80% of respondents rated cybersecurity as important, to very important, but almost half rated their understanding of cybersecurity and cyber risk as average. And some of the barriers that they cited through that survey included sort of a lack of dedicated IT staff, businesses that didn't know how to plan and respond to cyber incidents, and high complexity, low self-efficacy, and this underestimation of risk that was really prevalent. So obviously we have an uphill battle, I think, from here. So the next question or the next sort of area I want to explore with everybody is, why is it important that business leaders engage with cybersecurity? And maybe, Denis, if we could maybe start with you from your experience. Why is this important? And have you seen an evolution in the not-for-profit space towards business leaders sort of starting to take this a little bit more seriously?
I think more recently, because the exposure of the critical incidents that are occurring every day, that you open the paper or you turn on a website and there is always one or two stories, and you immediately think, potentially, is that my organisation that's next? For a business owner or an organisation, for a community group or whatever, traditionally we've invested in social services or finance or software or whatever. It's just another investment for the company. We cannot separate it from the coffee that we supply staff or the actual functions of providing chairs and desks, etc. It is a line item. It's going to increase investment and you have to keep focused on it. And I think those are one of the key issues that organisations have to do. It's no longer this abstract notion that sort of the tech heads look after that. It's every person in the organisation has to be so conscious about every one of these issues, and the traditional owners have to invest. It's a fundamental right for an organisation's survival, and I think it has to be in the DNA, and organisations just have to change their focus. It has to be an agenda item on a board paper or a management meeting. These are the things that they have to address.
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of BAU, isn't it? Or it should be. And Keith, what about from a Combank's perspective?
I'm really lucky and fortunate. I'm in the position where, I think everybody in Comback in the group understands that cyber is a team game. And that's something that is just so important to drive home. It's really not possible for small number of cyber, however good they are, to protect the entirety of organizations themselves. Everybody has to have security within the top of their top three kind of priorities, I would say. So that's very important. And it's not just about you as a leader within an organization understanding it for your organization. That's just so important for your customers to keep their data safe. It's so important for the wider kind of ecosystem and supply chain. So, your business needs you, your customers need you, your ecosystem needs you to understand and be engaged in this.
Yeah, and speaking of ecosystem, one of the interesting aspects of the new Australian government 2020 strategy has been the real inclusion of ecosystem and the protection of small businesses across Australia, as they make up such a huge part of our economy. So Lesley, why do you think, given that development, given that focus, that it's so important for businesses of all sizes and all sectors to engage in that policy discussion?
So, I mean, the how businesses think and operate is quite different from how government thinks and operates. Government will be, and policy making will be focused on that national interest, etc. And the last thing you want is for that particular sort of way of thinking about the world to dominate or drive economic outcomes that suit different businesses. So I think it's really important for small businesses in particular to develop a voice or develop a certain degree of policy sophistication in this area as best they can. And they'll be looking to actually help, work with their partners in this as well to sort of try and drive that understanding. Often it's small businesses who are going to be at the sort of the leading edge in some of the things that they're doing, because they'll be developing new forms of IP, for example. They'll be sort of dealing directly with people about things from health systems to, some tax and financial information, etc. And they need to make sure, as a whole economy, we need to make sure that we build trust into the system, because otherwise, with the lack of trust, the cost of doing business will increase, and you'll get a whole range of overheads that come into place as well. I think it's important too that we start thinking in terms of this is just another sort of thing that we just take into account in how we work, whether it's financial, legal, technology, and cyber. They're all the things that make businesses work, and we need to think of it in those terms, rather than just sort of almost cutting it out and saying this is special. And the reason I say that is because you don't want it to be someone else's problem. This is something that businesses, all organisations, have to own themselves and drive themselves as well.
That's right. And we probably don't have time to go into it today, but interesting that we've focused so much from a skills perspective on addressing very technical, very specialized cybersecurity roles, when we also need to focus on sort of making all roles in the economy more cyber aware, more cyber secure. So that's a really great point, Lesley. So moving on, we've sort of talked about the risk, we've talked about threat landscape, we talked about what sort of blockers there might be. I'd like to now talk about what we can do, what we can all do to sort of address this and play a role in making a more cyber secure Australia. So I guess the first question would be, regardless of an organization size, where is the best place to start when it comes to sort of tackling cybersecurity head on and making some changes for the better? And Lesley, I might start with you if that's all right. So from your perspective, what are some of these wins?
So again, just going back to a point I was making before, it is just, we need to start understanding just being part of our business. When you're a CEO, for example, you automatically think, I need legal advice, I need financial advice. We need to include, risk and cyber risk and all those sort of things into there. On both those other occasions, legal and financial, you're prepared to go and seek specialists. You know that's the sort of things that you have to do. Legal advice, there might be provisions that you have to be constrained by or act within the remit of the law, etc. And so cyber and technology needs to be hooked into that. And we already have examples where this is the case. For example, work health safety. legislation has meant that many businesses now have to put in things around governance, seek specialist advice around what the work health safety provisions are and mean for them. And I think if we can hook in things like cyber into those sort of processes, because to me things like cyber are, particularly picking up Denis's points about things like privacy, that can go directly to people's health and safety. And we start hooking into those sort of things, that's going to be really helpful in the way, just shifting people's thinking and saying this is just another part of business, a really important part. And so we need to put governance around it, and we already have mechanisms in place we can use. That's one example.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Using existing blueprints that we know are tried and true and connecting cybersecurity back to that sort of core business is a really good approach. Denis, what about from your perspective, from your sector?
I think Lesley hit on a really good point. It's a governance issue. No organisation, whether you're a business or a community organisation, operates without some governance controls. So it has to start at the top. The board of the directors of a not-for-profit organisation or a business has to set the agenda to say this is a vital issue for the organisation. That then gets passed down to the CEO, and ultimately it gets passed down to every employee. It's not a unit's responsibility. While CommBank's got that great unit there with Keith, his job ultimately is to convince everyone, whether it's a bank teller or it's someone providing customer service, that it's their job to be aware of cybersecurity. And these are one of the vital things where organisations have to start, that they don't silo it into a responsibility for a section and then everyone abrogates responsibility for the day-to-day functions of cybersecurity. It has to be, as I said before, in the DNA of everyone. When you onboard new staff, there has to be protocols put in place that you educate them, you train them about all these things, and ultimately then you slowly infect an organisation, not like COVID, but infect people with knowledge and awareness of these issues so that it turns into a really positive thing, so that they protect the organisation's culture, the values, the data, and the reputation of that organisation. Everyone wants to work for a good organisation, and everyone has a responsibility to say, I want to make sure I'm looking after this data and the organisation's core assets to make sure that it survives and prospers.
And Keith, I might just finish off with you from your perspective. What are some of the things we can all do?
So, I mean, Denis, absolutely spot on there. And I think that then leads into a conversation about how do we demystify cyber in certain respects. And the governance is absolutely fundamentally important. And I spend a lot of time, I've got a lot of visibility at board level, our executive leadership team, all very interested in this particular subject. If we look across the kind of people, processes and technology, you've got to have a holistic approach to this. People education, more than anything else. How do you pick up on a phishing email, for example? What should you do if you accidentally click on it? You've got the technology as well, and I'd look at technology from a point of view of some simple steps would be work out where is your critical data, make sure that you've got regular backups of that, and preferably in a separate location, because that's one of the first indicators of a ransomware attack, is that backups are being deleted so you can't recover them. That's a very important piece. And simple stuff like keeping your antivirus up to date, keeping your endpoint detection and response, falling into the trap of not demystifying, EDR up to date as well. I think these are all fundamentally important pieces that everybody could do. Look after your social profiles as well. Think about multi-factor authentication on your LinkedIn account or Facebook and Gmail, etc., so that it's not just about passwords. And then when we talk about passwords, strong passwords are fundamentally important. Lastly, don't ignore the processes. So I would prepare for being compromised. What's your recovery plan? What do your playbooks look like? That's, I think, an important piece as well as just having robust processes, proper approvals in place for your payments processes, etc. So I'd also just point out this particular guide as well, which is called the Damn Good Advice on Cyber Safety and Fraud Prevention, which we publish. And there's lots of advice on our CommBank website and also Bank West Security website as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Keith. I would just like to ask if there's any sort of final thoughts before we close today.
If I could just add one, Martha, I would say that it's really important that we don't blame the victim here. And that's been a lesson from my own personal experience. We need to actually get out and say, look, anyone can fall victim to this. We need to learn from each other. And so sharing our experiences, what works, what doesn't, is really important. And that's because cyber is very much a team sport. Absolutely. We're all in this together. Couldn't have said it better myself. So that's a really great place to end our discussion today. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists today for their pragmatic and informative discussion, and to thank everyone for viewing as well. And really, to keep this conversation going, I'd encourage all viewers to take a look at some of the great resources that we've got available to secure your business at the Bank West Security Centre or on the CommBank website at commbank.com.au/security. And also, of course, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre's website at cyber.gov.au. And always remember that cybersecurity is everyone's business, and we all play a role towards building a more cyber secure Australia. Thank you.